Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Eric Coleman with IIST and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar, Collaborative Acceptance Test-Driven Development Through Scenarios by Dr. Magdi Hanna. We're excited you're able to join us today. Set aside an hour to attend this webinar. This webinar is sponsored by IIST, the leaders in education-based certifications and training. For more information on how IIST can help you or your organization, please visit testinginstitute.com. This webinar is one of a series of free webinars offered by IIST. Be sure to join us for the next webinar in the series, Scenario-Based Development and Testing for Agile and Non-Agile Projects by Dr. Magdi Hanna on August 11th from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. To learn more about this and other webinars in the series, go to testinginstitute.com. You may submit your questions at any time by using your question box in your GoToWebinar window. Today's presenter will answer as many questions within the time allowed at the end of today's session. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available for viewing within 48 hours at testinginstitute.com. At the end of today's webinar, you'll be asked to complete a short survey. At IIST, we strive to provide the highest quality educational resources for the public and would appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to complete this short survey. I will now turn the webinar over to today's presenter, Dr. Magdi Hanna. Dr. Hanna?
Thank you, Eric. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for all of you for joining me today in this 1-hour webinar. This webinar, as you know, is organized by the International Institute for Software Testing. If you miss any of our webinars, you know you can always go to testinginstitute.com and listen to previous webinars. They are recorded and posted there. Before I start, I have an interest to learn about you. I'd like to know how many of you actually currently work on Agile projects. Just to, if you do work on Agile project, please go ahead and click the hand there to raise your hand so that I can see how many are they. Okay. All right. Again, please go ahead and click the hand to let me know that you're currently working on an Agile project. I know there is a way for me here to automatically count, but I am not seeing it, but I'll just go ahead and count. So far I have all right, about 30 or 35 people or so. All right, I'm going to put your hand down and I'm going to ask a follow-up question. How many of those who raise their hands work on a project, on an Agile project that uses test-driven development? Forgive me, I am going to bring your hand down again before you raise your hand. How many of you, if you work on a project, if your Agile project uses test-driven development, please go ahead and raise your hand. Right. Not too many people though. And I'm not surprised. Again, for the last time, if your project is using test-driven development, of course, if you don't know if your project is using it or not, then most likely they don't. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, we got only about 1/3 of Agile projects using test-driven development. Would it be fair also to ask, since we're talking about a technique that falls between development and testing, can I ask how many of you are actually developers as opposed to QA and testing? How many of, if you are a developer writing a code in any language, please go ahead and raise your hand. I'm sorry, let me lower your hand first. Okay, go ahead. If you are a developer writing code in any language, please go ahead and raise your hand. I'm not expecting too many though, because for some reason, some of the developers do not like to hear from me. I don't have any hands yet. Interesting. Interesting. So all my audience today are 100% QA or testing or something else. I don't want to generalize, but rather none of my audience today is developers. Well, good. Then we can badmouth developers as much as we want now, right? No. All right. No hands up yet. So good. Well, given that, I'm really grateful to you, to all of you, that you decided to take the time from your busy schedule to listen and learn about a topic that most of the time, the way it is practiced, it does not really apply and it does not belong to QA. But today's presentation is not for developers. Well, developers can benefit from it, but my view of test-driven development absolutely involves QA. So whether your project is using test-driven development or not, I am hoping after today's webinar you can go back and show your development team the right way, and I'm going to say that, the right and correct and effective way to do test-driven development, and you will help your development team overcome the problems they have been experiencing with traditional, typical test-driven development, the way they have been doing it, and that is if they have been doing it. Let me share with you first the agenda, very quick. I'm going to go through a definition of what test-driven development is to make sure that we are all on the same page. All right, and then I will share with you why, and that's of course based on my experience. I'll share with you why test-driven development does not really deliver the quality we expected. Kind of what are the problems, which people did not even look into it for years. But then I will share with you my approach to test-driven development, which involves QA and testing, and involves a lot of collaboration, which normally does not happen with test-driven development, right? And what you see at the last item there, that is the process that I will be sharing with you. Okay. The origin of test-driven development comes from the whole concept of test-first programming. Back in 2003, our wonderful expert Kent Beck has written in a book on extreme programming. And, excuse me, in extreme programming, Kent recommended that developers should test first. Well, kind of weird idea, because how are we going to test? How are developers going to test something that they did not write the code for yet? It's not, you should not be taking this as literally as it is written, because obviously, in order to test anything, developers have to write the code first and then test it. So it's not really test first. So if I were to modify this phrase, I would have called it test design first, meaning that we need to design the tests first. We're not going to test first. We're going to design the tests first. Then we write the code. Then we run the test. So it's a three-step process, as we're going to see. So the whole test first programming idea was for developers not to rush and go and write code, but rather first try to write test cases for their unit testing based on what the requirement or what the user story said. And by the way, at the time extreme programming existed, people did not know much about user stories. User stories kind of came later on when Scrum methodology in Agile started to be very popular, and people started to use user stories. But everyone was still using the requirements. So really the concept was that when developers get a requirement to write code for, the idea is that they should not go and write code first, but rather they should go and write the test cases first. Then they write the code based on the test cases. Then they execute the test cases. Okay, and we'll see how it works now. So here is the diagram that shows how test-driven development. And of course, if your project does not use test-driven development, it's going to be your first time to see this or experience this. So as I said, developers, keep in mind, this whole chart is for developers. It is not for QA. So developers go and write a test case, one test case, a unit test case. And then you start writing code such that in their mind while they're writing a code, they say, I am writing code to make sure when I run this test case, it should pass. All right? Then the next step is they run the test case against the code they wrote. If they did a good job in the first place and they wrote their code to pass the test case, then good. They go back and write another test case and write another test case, and they repeat the process, as you can see. However, it is possible that the test case they wrote and the code they wrote, when they run the test case, it fails. So of course, when the test case fails, they go back and make changes to the code and go back and rerun the test case again against the code. Very much they're repeating this test. Again, one more time. If that test case fails, they go back and make more changes to the code. They keep modifying the code to pass the test case. All right? Until eventually that test case is passed. If there are more test cases to be written, which means they don't feel that they fully tested that functionality, they go back and write another test case and repeat the cycle. If they get to a point where they say, this is enough, I tested enough, I feel comfortable that this functionality or this requirement or that feature or that user story has been completely tested, then they go and move on to another functionality and they repeat the whole process. Now, I am assuming that many of you have not seen this before. I want to get, again, a count of how many of you with me here are hearing this kind of idea or concept or practice for the first time, and if you care to provide me with your impression. I want you to be a thinker. I don't want you to sit there and listen to what I have to say, because I have my own experience and my own opinion about this approach we're talking about that's been out there for almost 15 years now, but I want to hear from you as an intelligent QA professional out there. I want you to share with me through the questions panel. If you click on questions, you can certainly go ahead and give me your impression. Of course, I understand that you're going to give me your opinion based on no experience because you have not worked on a project that uses this approach. However, those of you who worked in projects that used test-driven development, go ahead also share with me your opinion because I need to listen. This is an important thing for all of us to be able to learn about things and share our opinion, share our experience, good or bad, anything your team was able to do in order to tweak that approach or that process to make it better, or anything that perhaps your development team decided to completely abandon the process. There's all kinds of experiences out there. And of course, there are those developers out there who says, oh, I love it. I love to do it every day. And it's great. So please, this is not a webinar where you just sit down and listen to me. Of course, if that's what you want to do, fine. But I want you to be a thinker. I want you to be critical. I want you to be analytical. I want you to analyze this and tell me, what do you think? Is this going to produce quality? Is this a good thing to do or not? Go ahead, but most importantly, tell me on the questions by raising your hand if you're hearing this for the first time. If you are hearing this for the first time. I suspect that most of you are. I mean, I know there's about 10 people who said their project is already using test-driven development. Okay, if you're hearing this for the first time, I guess I might have asked my question wrong because I only have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people saying they're hearing this for the first time. Fine, which means that the rest of you, at least 70 people or so, oh, I know about this. I already know about this. Good. Whether you know about it or not, please go ahead and share with us your opinion / your experience, good or bad. And I will continue to teach, but I will go back and share your experience with others. Okay? Well, I should not really put this slide in front of you because I will I will influence your thinking. So let me just make a few comments here. Writing test cases, the first step, that's based on what? Based on a requirement. Most importantly, it's based on the developer's interpretation of the requirement. Well, what if the requirement they're working with is like any other requirement we see, which is incomplete and ambiguous and having all kinds of problems? Does it help to try to write test cases based on those requirements? No, because poorly written requirement will always lead to poorly written tests. And if we're going to write the code based on those poorly written tests, then we have poorly written code. Very simple. I don't know why people did not think about this 15 years ago. Okay, now I'm trying to get you excited here so that some of you would say, no, Magdi, that is not what we do. We do something different. Because I want to hear from you if your project is doing something different. I understand that if your project is taking a requirement or a user story to write test cases for, I am sure that you spend some time reviewing that requirement or user story. But it is still questionable whether that review actually eliminates ambiguity and eliminate incompleteness with the requirement. Okay, so again, would love to hear from you. So that's my first problem with this. Writing test cases based on requirements that are not complete, that are missing lots of details, that are ambiguous, that may have some inconsistency, that's not clear. You write test cases based on those test cases are missing so much. Developers might think that they tested everything in the requirement, but the requirement does not say anything anyway. Now, let's shift from requirements to user stories. Do user stories, in your experience, if your project has been using user stories, do user stories do any better for us than requirements? My answer is no. User stories are no better than requirements. In fact, they are far worse than requirements. Why? Because they're brief. They are brief. Now, again, one more time, I am trying to get you to chat with me. I am trying to get someone saying, no, our developers do not write test cases based on user stories, but rather they do something else. I want to hear from you what that something else is, and if I don't hear it from you, I will state it. I will teach it. Okay. Now, this is one problem, that requirements are always incomplete, user stories are brief, and so on. Another problem is that who's doing this? By all rules of test-driven development, it's all done by the developer. I'm not going to say that, do we trust the developer? Because we should certainly trust the developer. He or she is writing the code, and they know how to test it. Okay, but it has been known from day one that developers should not be testing their own code. Now, the truth is, in test-driven development, the way it has been practiced, it is the developer who tests his or her own code. One more time. I'm hoping to hear from someone saying, no, my project does it differently. See, here's the thing. We get a method or a technique that we're supposed to use in anything, and we're supposed to make modifications to that technique. No one should ever say that this is the way it should be done. No. The way it should be done, the way any technique or any method should be done, it should be done in the way that's effective for your project, which means you should feel free to modify and adapt a method or a technique to your project and your practice. So that's another problem. It is always done by developers. And developers, in most cases, are isolated from QA. Even if we are in an Agile project, and in Agile project, we're supposed to have lots of collaboration between development and testing and the product owner and so on. At least in my opinion, I don't believe that collaboration has been a big part of the test-driven development. It might be a part of something else, like a part of talking about the system. Collaboration might have been a part of talking about decisions to be made or about status. But when developers sat down to write the test cases and write the code for those test cases, very much they did it on their own. They did not involve the QA. If you are a QA person and you actually have an active role in the test-driven development process in your project, I would love to hear from you, because that is the practice that we need to publicize. I want to see how you get involved in test-driven development, because the process I'm going to give you today is actually very effective in getting the QA involved in test-driven development. Okay? Excuse me. My last point about this practice, the way it is being practiced, is that those test cases that are written by developers are written in some sort of a scripting language. They're not written in plain English. Okay? I've never seen test-driven development is practiced manually. It is always, there is a tool that they use, and they write the test cases in the scripting language of that tool, and hoping that they will use that tool to run the test cases. So what's wrong with that? What's wrong with automating test-driven development? Oh, nothing is wrong. Automation is great because it speeds up the process. The only problem I have with it is that QA people, most QA people, are not knowledgeable of that scripting language. So if I am a typical QA person in an Agile project, I could even go and read the test case written in some scripting language, unless, of course, I really advanced my skill set and I crossed the bridge between QA and development, and I learned that language. But the truth is, it is written in a language that most QA people are not familiar with, but most importantly, product owners are not familiar with. Most importantly, customers and users are not familiar with. So in a way, what I am saying here is that those test cases written in this scripting language are only readable and understandable by the developer, which does not give any opportunity for anyone else to review them or approve them or anything. All right, now I'm going to look at any feedback that I received from anyone else to help me, because remember, I've been saying things and I've been triggering you to disagree with me. And I hope I have some disagreements. Sanel says, it seems like this approach would first be more successful when developer is in unit test phase, regardless or whether in an agile environment or in a waterfall environment. And Sanel is asking the question. And Sanel, you're absolutely right. It's mostly for unit testing. And it should have been used, or it could be used, in a project, whether the project is agile or not. There is nothing that says test-driven development is only for agile projects. Okay, good point, Sanel, good point. All right, Wayne. Wayne says, first time hearing about this, I think this is good, but I can see that the overall functionality can still be wrong due to not being implemented correctly. Thank you, Wayne. Well said. Very well said. And I'm assuming when you say not being implemented correctly, you mean the developer, because here's the thing. The test cases have been written based on the developer's interpretation of the requirement. So if I am a developer and I read the requirement in a certain way and I interpret it in a certain way, and I am not one of those good developers who always go back and ask questions and validate assumptions, I am going to go ahead and write the test cases based on my own interpretation of the requirement, and I will write the code based on those test cases. And you're absolutely right, Wayne. At the end, we can be delivering functionality that does not meet the customer needs at all. All right. Of course, someone says, oh, but we have the QA team that will go ahead and test. All right. But then what did we do then? What are we going to do when the QA team finds out that the functionality was implemented incorrectly? Well, the developers still have to go back and change the code and perhaps change their test cases. So I don't know how does this help then? I always said we have been always concerned about developers taking a requirement and misinterpreting it and misunderstanding it and writing bad code based on those requirements. I mean, this goes without saying, guys. If you have not already experienced that, I'm going to tell you this. I live with this every day. I live every day with situations where developers take requirements that are vague, incomplete, missing lots of details, ambiguous, and they start to making their own interpretation and their own assumptions, and they write code that does not implement everything that the requirement intended to say. So I say, all right, if that's our problem, how does test-driven development solve this problem? It does not. Test-driven development, as it is implemented now, it does not really help solving that problem of misunderstanding and misinterpreting requirements and writing the bad code about it. The only thing it does is to say, before you write the code, write the test cases. But the test cases could be wrong. And as Wayne said, the functionality also can be wrong. Thank you, guys. I'm very pleased with the feedback. I wanted to make sure that we are all on the same page. Dustin says, it makes sense to me. Developers will eventually tend to write better code that will pass more cases or scenarios. Dustin, your point is well taken. However, you missed the point that Wayne just made. Developers will write better code. You're absolutely right. Developers will write better code that passes the test cases. But which test cases are we talking about? The test cases that were written by the developer based on that code, based on those requirements. So you're right. At the end, I can ask the developer, how many test cases did you write? He says 100. He says, did any of them fail? He says, no, they're all passed. Great. Does this guarantee that the written code meets the requirements as expected by the user? No. That's the point that Wayne made. Dustin, go ahead if you follow up, if you want to follow up with another opinion. All right, Alina says, I'm not sure if development create any additional test cases, but just to use test cases that the QA share with them. Alina, is this how it is practiced in your project? She says, Alina adds, the thought process is good because it puts accountability on developers. I must agree with the last part of your analysis. It does put some accountability on the developer. In a way, telling developers, first, you better test. You're not going to be able to do what we used to do before, which is writing terrible code and passing it on to QA people, and the QA people will find all the garbage that you wrote. You need to test your code. So if there is one thing good about test-driven development that I must mention, that it does, as Alina says, I'm sorry, forgive me, Lena, you did not say the last part. Dina did, forgive me. Dina is the one who said the thought process is good because it puts some accountability on the developers. And I agree with that 100%. It tells developers that you must test. You can no longer write code without testing it. Now, whether you write the code first and test it, or you write the test cases first and then write the code, you still have to test. Now, going back to Alina's opinion, Alina says, I'm not sure if developers create additional test cases, but rather they use the test cases from the QA team. I'm going to tell you, at least, Alina, this is not how test-driven development is done. And if this is how it is done in your project, then that's not a good idea. Because if you're going to write test cases, give them to developers to write their code based on that. Then what are you going to be testing then? Obviously, if you're going to give your test cases to developers to run them and they make sure to test it, that they pass, then when it comes time for you to test, you could very well say, oh, thank you very much, I don't need to test anymore. However, the process I'm going to give you in a little bit takes your idea and modifies it a little bit. Please bear with me. I better go faster in reading those comments. Sanel says, I am hearing this for the first time. Harsh says, yes, we have been using it on our projects, but he has not provided any experience here. Okay. Paula says, this seems rather backwards. Of course, it is backward. If you write the code to pass test cases, your code will certainly pass tests, of course. That's the whole idea. But will it meet the customer needs? So Paula now is just reconfirming what Wayne said earlier. Kim says, I have heard of this before. We have never used it. I would love to work on an agile team that does this. Trying to pick up some few things. Kirov says, developers do not wish to give QA that much control. I agree with you. Wayne comes back and say, integration testing between modules will still be vulnerable to problems due to developers not agreeing with what the message should be for communicating between modules. Okay, please don't be upset at me if I don't share your point of view. Wayne, thank you so much for all your feedback. You've been providing good feedback here. Okay, Wayne comes back and say, user stories are small and do not take into account the overall functionality. You're absolutely right. They are only pieces of the puzzle and do not know what the big pictures are. Absolutely correct. So, of course, Cynthia, yes, I agree with you. QA always will test developers' code. I like to hear from Sharon. She says, in my world, we all design and have input on requirements. Good. Developers only write code alone. So we will agree on completeness of requirements before developers start coding. All what you're saying, Sharon, is great. The fact that you all agree on the completeness and the unambiguity of the requirements, but you're not saying anything about test-driven development. So you're saying you guys make sure that the requirements are clear, complete, unambiguous before developers take them to write the code. I like, actually, Kim, is it the same Kim? No, that's a different Kim. Kim comes back. I like to hear this from people. Kim says, sorry, where did this go? Here you go. Kim says, we feel our requirements are very complete when we plan a story that does not, that goes into our backlog. Okay, the entire team is involved in understanding the requirements and the building acceptance criteria, sorry. I feel our development and the QA are more often on the same page. Wouldn't you want to work with an organization like that? Kim, are you hiring? Because if I were a QA person out there looking for a job, I would love to work for your team. I'd love any QA person should really be anxious to work in a team like this, where Kim says we are on the same page, we work it together, we review the requirements together. She even mentioned something about acceptance criteria, which is a good practice in agile projects. When a team sits down to write acceptance criteria, that is the greatest thing, because they're simply saying that you, developer, we would not consider have done a good job unless your code passes those acceptance criteria. Okay, Kim, thank you so much for sharing this with you. Again, as I said, I've been saying terrible things, trying to trigger people like you to share these good experiences. All right. All right, let me move on because I need to teach you something, right? So I think this summarizes what I just said about my concerns. Requirements are always having a problem. The approach heavily depends on subjective interpretation of requirements or user stories by developers, and tests are written in a language that's not understood by most QA and user acceptance testing team. All right. Now, let me spend some time talking about collaboration in TD. Now, in my opinion, the process of test-driven development is normally done with no collaboration whatsoever. The collaboration I'm talking about here is that after the developer writes the test cases, does he or she go back and put those test cases out to be reviewed by QA, user acceptance testing people, customers, product owners? I would love to hear from any one of you who would say, yes, in our agile or even non-agile projects, we do review the test cases for test-driven development. Now, again, remember, we're talking about something very specific here. I'm not talking about reviewing test cases in general. I'm talking about reviewing test cases that are written by developers based on which they're going to be writing the code. If your agile team, and I'm going to suspect that this only happens in agile teams, if your agile teams have a good practice to review test cases that are produced under test-driven development, please go ahead and raise your hand and share your experience, because we all want to hear from you. We all want to hear good experience and a good practice. I'd love to hear how an agile team would adopt an approach by which they can QA and user acceptance testing people and product owners can collaboratively review test cases. Go ahead and raise your hand if that is the case in your project. Oh, Alina raised her hand. Okay, good. I'm going to encourage you, Alina, please to share with us anything we can learn from. And Ramesh also. That's about it. Ramesh and Alina, please go ahead and share with us anything we can learn from, unless you consider it a trade secret that you don't want to share. Anything that I can share with the rest of the team, with the rest of the people here in the class, to say this is a good thing, this is a good way to participate. But let me talk to you about collaboration and how it is supposed to happen. I'm going to say there is no collaboration that could possibly happen without using a tool. I'm not talking about collaboration where we just stand up in a stand-up meeting in an agile project, whether you call it Scrum meeting or stand-up meeting or agile team meeting. I'm not talking about that kind of collaboration. I'm talking about collaboration that's coordinated with the use of a tool, a collaboration tool. And I put for you here some of the things that a tool must do to facilitate collaboration. So if you're really talking about good collaboration practices in agile or non-agile project, because I've been teaching people about collaboration, and I've been speaking about collaboration as a project culture, I'd say over the 20 years ago. And roughly agile did not appear, I mean, I'd say probably was about the time where agile starts to be known. But I've been always talking about collaboration as a project culture, because I've always believed that whether your project is agile or not, you cannot do a good job without collaboration. And here are and of course, the collaboration I've always spoke about is not something, does not mean that we have to sit down in a meeting and talk. It doesn't mean that you should be able to walk to someone else's cubicles and talk. No, in fact, I am totally against that. I'm totally against those side discussions, those one-on-one discussions, because they are simply one-on-one collaborations. I don't want that. I want team collaboration. And the team collaboration can happen only on using some sort of a tool. And I'm going to give you more details in a little bit. The tool must allow putting something out, whether it is a test case or a requirement or a user story, and allow people to review it. And the tool must keep track of the interactions. If someone asks a question about the user story or the test case or whatever, it should be always associated with that test case, and the tool should keep track of that, and the tool should keep track of the answers that were provided by someone and who provided the answer. This is a simple bookkeeping tool. Okay? This is a simple bookkeeping tool that keeps track of things. Also, the tool must send the people notifications, because people are not going to go into a tool to look at things. But if someone posted the question, if someone posted a test case or a requirement or a user story to be reviewed, I, as a team member, I want to get an email that says, Joe just posted a requirement to be reviewed. And some easy way for me to click on a link that allows me to get into the tool and look at that user story or whatever it is that I need to review. And another easy way for me to provide my feedback. And not only that, when I provide my feedback, a notification should go out to the rest of the team to tell them that Magdi just provided feedback or review of this requirement or this user story or whatever. Okay. A lot of things a tool can do for you, and it's not that difficult to find a tool to do this. So with that being said, this is how it should look. There should be a place where I can post the artifact, whether this artifact is a test case or a group of test cases or a requirement or a user story or whatever it is. I'm not talking about SharePoint here. I'm not talking about SharePoint as a software. I'm not talking about Microsoft SharePoint, because Microsoft SharePoint is a document sharing software. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an artifact review, collaborative review. And it should be a synchronous manner, meaning that people don't have to be available at the same time. People do not even have to be in the same time zone, because that's my experience actually. I worked on projects that rarely all project team is in one place. So I cannot meet with them, and I cannot rely on real-time meeting online to have everyone there, because at the time I am deciding to investigate something here or review something, the rest of my team is sleeping somewhere else in a different country. So I cannot afford to do this. So a synchronous collaboration is required. So let me now trigger your thinking by saying, traditionally, and those of you who attended my webinars before, you've seen this. Typically, we take a requirement or a user story and write test cases, right? I'm going to have to say that don't do this. It has been proven over and over again that it does not work. And it does not work for the reasons I mentioned. Requirements are terrible. We don't write good requirements. So we have to do something else. We have to take the requirements or the user story and do something else. With the same token, developers should not be taking a requirement or a user story and writing design or code, because it doesn't work either. So if you're having user stories, at the very least, as forgive me, someone said, I can't remember who that was, said we write acceptance criteria. We review the requirements, we write acceptance criteria. Let me share with you here. Now user stories are not any different from requirements, and we've seen an opinion that user stories are very brief, very short, and they don't provide much details. So whether you have requirements or user stories, it doesn't matter. You cannot do this. You cannot do this. So what can you do? Here's my process. Here's my process. I understand that it's a lot to grasp at once, but here at the top, I have all forms of requirements here. I have requirements, I have user stories. If your project is a little bit more advanced and using use cases, and use cases, if you don't know already, are very different from requirements and user stories. Even if your project is using user interface, meaning that developers have done some prototypes, screen prototypes, and those screen prototypes are available. Any one of those forms must be collaboratively discussed and reviewed. And this is what I was talking about the tool will do for you. So I put a user story, and I do this every day with my team. I put a user story or a requirement out in the tool for a review, and I ask people to review them. And people start reviewing, asking the questions. I answer the questions based on my answer. Other people ask a follow-up question. Other people may have a problem with my answer because they didn't think that this is part of that user story, or they thought that what I am talking about is part of a different user story or a different requirement. So the whole discussion has to happen here. And during the same time, everyone collaboratively should define scenarios and validate them. Now, of course, you're going to have to assign 1 or 2 roles in the project to do this. Typically, in my own experience and my own practice, it is the QA team and possibly the user acceptance testing team that build those scenarios. But scenarios are built and validated at the same time, probably also at the same time when the requirements are being reviewed. So there's no sequential thing here. This is all happening at the same time. So I post a user story or a requirement here, and I may attach to it a screen prototype. And everyone is looking at it. If someone has a question, they posted a question. But if the QA person is not having a question yet, he or she can go ahead and put the scenarios. Now, interestingly enough, the scenarios are also done collaboratively. So the QA person put the scenario out there. Now everyone is seeing the scenarios. Now other people can look at the scenario and start asking questions about the scenarios, or start making a comment or a remark or anything, or raising a concern about scenarios. So if I am a QA person and I write 5 or 6 scenarios here in the tool, and a developer can see my scenarios, a developer can very well come back and says, Magdi, I don't think those scenarios are part of this user story or part of this requirement. Well, guess what? The product owner or the business analyst or whoever has a word about this can also see my scenarios and can see the remark done by the developer, and he or she can be can go on and say either yes, they are part of this user story, or no, they're not. And if they say no, it's not part of the user story, guess what? Magdi here has to remove those scenarios, has to agree. All right, so these 2 boxes are very collaborative, okay? Now, on the side here, if your project is using use cases, guess what? As part of use cases, you already have use case scenarios, which are very much similar to those scenarios, and I'm asking for the same thing to happen collaboratively. use cases are going to be discussed here. The scenarios out of the use cases will be discussed here. Once we finalize the discussions here, only then, and this is the only sequential part of my process, what happens? You can see now I'm suggesting that the development team start building the test cases based on those scenarios. So now suddenly, so these three boxes here are the test-driven development. But test-driven development here starts with what? With scenarios. Not with a requirement, not with the user story. Okay? So developers take the scenarios and start writing the test cases. Then they start writing the code. I mean, that's up to them. If they don't want to do this, fine. If your project does not want and does not believe in test-driven development or the concept of test first, that's fine. They can just take the scenario and instead of doing this, they start writing this. Design and code. And when they design and code, they start testing those under their own way of unit testing. So, which means those boxes. So anyway, you can move this box down here. And if you move this box between those two boxes, it's not a test-driven development anymore. But here's my important thing. And again, those of you who have attended my courses before, this is, by the way, part of a larger course that I teach for 3 days. It's called Best Practices in Software Test Planning and Design. Now, here, the QA team will take those scenarios and build their own test cases and test scripts. There's a difference between the two. The test cases that will be written here are unit level test cases. The test cases that will be written here are system level test cases. But they're all, it doesn't matter, they're all based on the same scenarios. Now, do you want me to tell you what kind of benefit that have been reported to me by customers, by companies using this? Absolutely. I've got it more than once that when the QA team goes down and they start executing their tests, so I must put a box down here for test execution. When they start executing their tests, I've been told that there has been a major reduction in the number of bug reports found by the QA team, up to 70% reduction in the number of bug reports. Of course, this is not a secret. I mean, this is a no-brainer. That's what you should expect, because developers have written their unit testing test cases based on those scenarios. And by the way, the number I just mentioned, the 70% reduction, was done by companies that did not even do test-driven development. They just did this. They just did the approach, and then developers have taken the scenarios and written their code and tested their code their own way. But I think that the reduction in the number of bug reports is because developers are working from the same page. I believe it was Diana or someone else, correct me if I'm wrong, who said, I strongly see that our team is very much on the same page all the time. And you know why? Because her team said they do acceptance criteria, which kind of comes in the place of the scenarios here. And that's another thing I want to mention. If your team is already doing acceptance criteria, you need to find out if your acceptance criteria are on the level of precision of scenarios or not. And if not, then you need to build the scenarios. Now, who's involved? I'm going to say anyone can be involved here. I'm sorry, right here. Everyone is involved. No exception. This is a project team right here. Even users. If you have some intelligent users, you can get them involved. All right? Now, when you start, my last slide here is about how to review scenarios, how to validate scenarios. You're looking for things like that, okay? So I guess we're almost out of time here. I want to give some time. I have a minute left. I want to see some questions very quick. Okay, I've got a question here. It says, what tool would you recommend? What tool are you using? Well, I hate to bring that up because I don't want it to sound like I am promoting my tool, but the tool I'm using is from Romana Software, which if we go here to and of course, it's no secret that I am the chief architect of this tool. Now, the thing about Romana tool, and this is the only one I am aware of, please, if you know of any other tool, that does collaboration in the way I'm explaining it, please let me know and I will share it with everyone else. But look at that. It does not matter which package you acquire from Romana. And the package, as you can see, it's down to $10 per user per month. But you can see this collaboration component. It's a part of every single package. That's because I personally believe, and my team believe, that you should not be doing anything without collaboration. So if you're just doing the requirement management and the use case management component, you get collaboration with it. If you're doing requirement management, test management, you get the collaboration component. Every single one. And by the way, as you can see, you build on top of, I mean, like you start with the simplest package you need and you start changing it over time. You say, for now, let's start with the package that helped me review requirements, review use cases, review requirements and user stories, and allow me to do collaboration, and the change management goes without saying. And a month later, you say, you know, I want to start doing my test cases by developers and test cases by QA, and that's the test management piece. That's what you get here. You still get the collaboration. So it's all built on top of that. So that's the tool I use. That's the tool I've known the most. If any one of you knows about any tool that does the kind of collaboration I'm talking about, please share with me. I'm going to look here at the questions to see if anyone can share with us a name of another tool. Carol says a tool called Vision One. Vision One. Carol, thank you very much. If you think of Vision One would allow you to post an artifact, whether it is a requirement or user story or test case or group of test cases, and allow people to collaborate. Oh, I'm sorry, I misread that. Thank you so much. I don't know why, although I've known the word version one, I don't know why I read it Vision One. Version one, thank you for correcting me. Carol corrected me, it's a version one. Version one. And by the way, I've known version one almost 20 years ago. 20 years ago. And at the time I've known it, it did not have a good support of collaboration. Now, Jane is asking, how about Jira? Jane, I don't know. I cannot answer the question. I understand that Jira provides some level of collaboration, but to be honest with you, I do not know how elaborate it is. Keep in mind, being the chief architect of a tool, I am almost prohibited by ethical practice to look at features from other tools. So that I do not unknowingly copy features from other tools or copy ideas from other tools, although it's not against the intellectual property law, but I have taken it upon myself, being the chief architect of Romana Software, not to look at features in other tools. But certainly, based on what we heard from Carol and Jane, I would encourage everyone to look at version one and Jira. If anyone used Jira for collaboration, please confirm that. But obviously, Carol confirms that version one is a good collaboration tool. All right, I finished what I need to finish with you. My apology that I am 4 minutes beyond my time. Someone wants me to share the last slide here. Okay, here you go. Here's my last slide of the presentation. Is that this, who should participate, or reviewing the scenarios? One of the two, right? Let me know, Solomon, if that's the one you need. Okay, good, good. All right, I'm looking through questions here. I don't see any other questions. I need to finish, even I'm 4 minutes beyond my time here. Thank you all for participating. As always, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted at the IIST website in few days. And I encourage you to, if you think it's going to be useful for other members of your team, go ahead and have them listen to it. I will now leave the webinar to Eric to close.
Thank you, Dr. Hanna, for your time today. And I want to thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar sponsored by IIST, the leaders in education-based certifications and training. For more information on how IIST can help you or your organization, please visit testinginstitute.com. You can follow IIST on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube to find out more information about IIST news, events, and promotions. Thank you all again for joining us today, and have a great day. Thank you, Dr. Hanna.
Thank you, Eric.